A broke Ranger veteran, Damian Foster, uses his last dollar on a remote, dilapidated cabin. He shoves the door open, and immediately a shotgun is shoved in his face. The woman holding it is Vanessa, a pregnant stranger, trembling but desperate. Damian's canine chief reacts in a split second. He launches forward, a blur of fur and teeth, every muscle taut, ready to tear the threat apart. But then, the unthinkable happens. When Vanessa lowers the gun, Chief stops cold. The savage growl dies in his throat, replaced by a confused whine. He ignores Damian, moves closer, and nudges his head into the woman's hand. Damian is frozen. His canine, loyal only to him, why is he comforting the stranger who just threatened his life? He takes a hard look at the old flannel shirt she's wearing, and his entire world falls apart. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The old pickup's engine groaned, a strained metallic complaint as it hauled the weight of a life reduced to a 10-foot trailer. The tires spun in the mud of what the county auction map had optimistically called a road, but which was really just two deep ruts carved through the endless pine forest of the Idaho Panhandle. Inside the cab, Damian Foster gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. At 40, he wore the last 3 months like a decade of hard living. His brown hair, once kept high and tight in the Ranger tradition, was now overly long, and the gray invading his temples had begun a rapid march across his scalp. His face, lean and weathered, was set in a mask of tense exhaustion, the lines around his eyes betraying a sleeplessness that went bone deep. He hadn't really slept since James. Beside him, silent and watchful, sat Chief. The dog was a 5-year-old German Shepherd, but his coloring was more wolf than standard breed, a striking, beautiful mix of silver gray and white fur. He was a big animal, heavy-boned and powerful, but he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a professional. A retired canine, Chief was intensely loyal, but reserved. He didn't offer sloppy kisses or demand attention. His devotion was a quiet, steady presence, a shared understanding forged during long nights on patrol and cemented in the empty silence that followed their return to civilian life. Damian's gaze flickered from the muddy track to the dog. "Almost there, buddy," he murmured, his voice hoarse. Chief's ears twitched, but his eyes remained fixed on the trees ahead. He was always on watch. The rattling hitch of the U-Haul trailer was a constant, agonizing reminder of his failure. Everything Damian Foster owned was in that box. His tools, his clothes, the few photos he'd salvaged, and the folded American flag from his father's funeral. The company, Foster Brothers Construction, was gone, devoured by lawyers and creditors in a matter of weeks. The bankruptcy hadn't been a single event, but a slow, crushing collapse. It had all started the day James died, 3 months ago. Damian's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. The official report had called it accidental, a single-car crash on a clear night. His younger brother, his only family, gone. James the optimist, the one who handled the books and charmed the clients while Damian built the houses. After the funeral, Damian had tried to keep the business afloat, but the grief was a fog and the numbers never added up. He found discrepancies, strange withdrawals, angry clients he'd never heard of. It turned out James, his cheerful, seemingly irresponsible brother, had been the one holding it all together. Without him, the whole structure crumbled. This cabin, bought sight unseen from a county foreclosure auction, was the end of the line. It was the last of his money, a desperate gamble on a fresh start, a place so remote that the ghosts of his past might finally give him peace, a place to rebuild, or maybe just a place to stop falling. The truck crested a final rise, and the trail opened into a small, overgrown clearing. He turned the key, and the engine's labored rumble died, leaving a profound, unsettling silence. "This is it," Damian said, more to himself than to the dog. He stared through the windshield, his hope shriveling into a cold, hard knot in his stomach. The grainy 10-year-old photo online had shown a rustic, charming log cabin. The reality was a nightmare. It wasn't a fixer-upper. It was a ruin. The structure was dilapidated, rotting back into the earth. The porch roof sagged at a drunken angle, held up by little more than memory. The siding, where it wasn't missing entirely, was warped and gray, covered in a diseased-looking green moss. One of the front windows was a jagged, empty hole, stuffed with a plastic garbage bag that flapped weakly in the cold autumn breeze. A wave of overwhelming, bitter disappointment washed over Damien. He had failed again. He had spent his last dollar on a pile of rotten wood. He sat there for a long minute, the cab of the truck feeling like the only solid place left in the world. He closed his eyes, his training as a ranger screaming at him to assess, adapt, and overcome. But the civilian in him just wanted to put the truck in reverse and drive until the gas ran out. He let out a long, shaky breath and reached for the door handle. Well, let's see the damage. The truck door groaned in protest as he pushed it open, the sound unnaturally loud in the dead quiet. He swung his legs out, his worn combat boots sinking into the soft mud. The air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. He turned to let Chief out. "Okay, boy, come on." Chief didn't move. Damien whistled softly, the sharp two-note command they had used for years. The dog remained rigid, perfectly still on the bench seat. A low, barely audible vibration started deep in his chest. It wasn't a bark, but a rumble of profound distrust. Damien froze. He knew that sound. "Chief, what is it?" He watched his dog, the fur along Chief's spine, the heavy hackles from his shoulders to his tail, slowly stood on end. The dog's head was lowered, his intelligent eyes locked on the cabin, his black nose twitching as he tasted the air. He wasn't looking at the broken window or the sagging porch. He was assessing. In all their years, first in service and then in the quiet desperation of the last few months, Damien had learned to trust the dog's instincts implicitly. Chief was not a nervous animal. He was a trained canine. He signaled threats. He didn't invent them. Damien slowly, quietly, moved his hand from the truck door and let it rest near his hip, where his service pistol used to be. A useless reflex. He was unarmed. "What do you see, buddy?" he whispered. His own senses kicked in, the dormant ranger training pushing through the fog of his depression. He scanned the tree line. He checked the overgrown bushes. Nothing, no movement, no sound but the wind in the pines. He looked back at Chief. The dog hadn't moved, but his low growl had intensified, becoming a clear, definite warning. He was standing defensively, ready to place himself between Damien and whatever was in that cabin. Damien followed the dog's intense gaze, not at the door, not at the dark, empty-looking windows, but higher, at the chimney. From the crumbling stack of river stones, a pale, almost invisible wisp of smoke curled into the gray Idaho sky. Damien's heart hammered against his ribs. The cabin wasn't empty. Someone was burning his firewood, living in his cabin, trespassing on the last place on earth he had left to call his own. The silence in the clearing was absolute, broken only by the wind whispering through the pines and the low, steady rumble in Chief's chest. Damien's hand, which had been resting on the truck's door, instinctively moved to his hip, his fingers closing around empty air. The phantom weight of his service weapon was a feeling he'd never quite lost. He forced his hand open, flexing his fingers. First, control the animal. "Chief, quiet." His voice was a low command, barely more than a breath. The dog's growl didn't stop, but it subsided, dropping to a vibration Damien could feel more than hear. Chief remained rigid, a gray-white statue of pure, focused intent. Damien slid out of the truck, keeping the chassis between himself and the cabin. His ranger training, buried under months of grief and paperwork, surged back to the surface. He moved in a low crouch, his boots making almost no sound in the damp soil. He didn't approach the door. He flanked it, using the overgrown bushes as cover until he was pressed flat against the moss-covered logs of the cabin's blind side. He listened. Nothing. No voices, no movement, just the faint crackle of a small fire. He edged his way to the corner, peering around it. The front door was old, heavy plank wood, and it was slightly ajar. sloppy, or desperate. He took a deep breath, held it, and moved. In 3 quick, silent steps, he crossed the sagging porch and was at the door. He put his hand flat against the wood and pushed. A long, agonizing screech of old hinges, protesting in the damp air, ripped through the clearing. He flinched, expecting the sharp report of a gunshot. "Don't come any closer." The voice was female, high and thin with panic. Damien froze in the doorway, half in, half out. His eyes, accustomed to the gray daylight, struggled to adjust to the dim, musty interior. The cabin smelled of old smoke, damp wood, and fear. In the far corner, near a small, inefficient-looking stone fireplace, stood a woman. She was young, maybe late 20s, with dark, tangled hair that fell around a pale, gaunt face. Her eyes were wide, consumed by terror. But it was the 2 things she held that stopped Damien cold. One was an old pump-action shotgun, its muzzle wavering unsteadily but aimed directly at his chest. The other was her left hand, pressed protectively against the high, taut swell of her belly. She was heavily pregnant. Her hands were shaking so badly that the barrel of the gun made small, frantic circles in the air. Damien knew this was infinitely more dangerous than a trained opponent. A professional wouldn't fire by accident. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice low and calm. He raised his hands slowly, palms open and empty, showing he was unarmed. "I'm not here to hurt you." Outside, a single sharp explosion of sound erupted as Chief barked, sensing his owner's tension. The woman shrieked, a small, terrified sound, and her finger tightened on the trigger. "Call off your dog. Tell him to go away." "He stays outside," Damien said, his voice firm but soothing. He didn't dare move. "He won't come in. Just lower the gun. Please, I'm not a threat." "Who are you? What do you want?" she cried, her voice cracking. "My name is Damien Foster. I bought this place." That stopped her. Her panicked breathing hitched. "What? No, you're lying. This is a safe place." "I'm not lying," he said gently. "It was a foreclosure, from the county auction." He needed to prove it. This situation had to be de-escalated now. "I have the papers, in my jacket. I'm going to reach for them, very slowly." Her eyes narrowed, the shotgun barrel jerking upward. "Don't." "It's just paper," he insisted. "I'm not going to hurt you or your baby." He moved his right hand with exaggerated slowness, never breaking eye contact. He unzipped his canvas jacket and reached inside, pulling out the folded, creased deed. "Damien Foster, see?" He held it up. "That's me." He didn't walk toward her. He tossed the packet of papers onto the dusty wooden floor about halfway between them. She stared at the papers, then back at his face, her mind clearly struggling to process this new reality. He wasn't an attacker. He wasn't an enemy she could fight. He was just a man who owned the roof over her head. The tension, the adrenaline that had been holding her upright, evaporated all at once. The shotgun's weight became too much. The barrel dropped, pointing at the floorboards. She stumbled back, one hand flailing for balance, and sank onto a rickety wooden chair. The gun rested uselessly across her lap. She looked utterly, hopelessly defeated. The immediate danger was over. Damien let out the breath he'd been holding. He opened the door wider, his eyes still on her. "Chief, in. Easy." The dog entered like a gray shadow. He was no longer growling, but his body was rigid, hackles still partially raised. He moved fluidly, immediately positioning himself between Damien and the stranger, his intelligent eyes locked on her, a low rumble still present. He was ready to react to any sudden movement. The woman, who Damien now saw, was named Vanessa Brooks, according to the summary, didn't seem to register the dog. She just stared at the floor, her world shrinking to the few square feet of space she occupied. Then, the strangest thing happened. Chief stopped rumbling. He took a hesitant step forward, his body language shifting from guard to curious. His head tilted. A high, confused whine escaped his throat. Damien tensed. "Chief?" The dog ignored the command. He moved past Damien's leg, walking slowly, cautiously, right up to Vanessa's chair. She flinched, raising a hand to her face as if expecting a blow. Chief stopped. He sniffed her trembling hand. Then, impossibly, he pushed his broad, noble head under her palm, nudging it. He whined again, a sound of deep, unmistakable recognition and comfort. Damien stood there, completely stunned. Chief was a one-man dog. He tolerated others. He did not seek affection from them. He never did this. His gaze snapped from the dog to the woman, and finally to what Chief was sniffing. It was the shirt Vanessa was wearing. It was a man's flannel, heavy and worn, far too large for her. It was red and black plaid. Damien's blood ran cold. He knew that shirt. He knew the small L-shaped tear near the left cuff where James had snagged it on a nail gun 2 summers ago. He knew the faint paint stain on the shoulder. It was his brother's favorite shirt. "That's James's," Damien said. The words came out flat, hollow, an accusation and a question in one. Vanessa's face, which had been pale and numb, crumpled. The dam of terror and grief she had been holding back broke. A raw sob tore out of her, echoing in the small, cold cabin. He was my boyfriend," she choked out, her free hand clutching the flannel, tears streaming down her face. "He told me to come here. He said it was safe. He told me to hide here." Damien just stood in the doorway, the musty air feeling too thin to breathe. The world tilted. His dog, who had barely mourned anyone, was actively comforting this stranger. This pregnant stranger. His brother James hadn't just died. He hadn't just left a mountain of debt. He had left this. He had left a pregnant girlfriend hiding in a foreclosed, rotting cabin that Damien, by some cruel cosmic joke, had just purchased. The shock gave way to a cold, sharp spark of resentment, a sudden bitter anger at the brother he loved and could no longer understand. Why? Why would James hide this from him? The tableau held for a long, stretched-out second. Damien frozen in the doorway, Vanessa sobbing into her hands, and Chief acting as a silent, warm bridge between them. The dog's patient whine, a sound of shared grief, finally broke Damien's paralysis. His resentment for James, a sharp, cold spike of betrayal, was still there, but it was eclipsed by the immediate reality. A pregnant, terrified woman was wearing his dead brother's shirt in a rotting cabin that he now apparently owned. The situation was impossible, but it was also right in front of him. And Damien Foster was, above all, a man who dealt with what was right in front of him. He took a step inside, his boot thudding heavily on the warped floorboards. He pulled the warped door shut behind him. The sound of the latch clicking into place felt unnervingly final. The air inside was frigid. The small fire in the hearth was little more than smoking embers. "It's cold," he said, his voice flat. "That fire won't last." Vanessa looked up, her face streaked with tears and grime. She seemed to shrink under his gaze, as if expecting to be thrown out. Before she could answer, a sudden, violent gust of wind hit the cabin. The entire structure groaned, and the plastic bag stuffed in the broken window pane snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Damien moved past her, his ranger instincts taking over. He wiped a clean patch on the grimy glass of the other window and looked out. What he had driven through was a light flurry. What was happening now was something else entirely. The world outside was gone, erased by a solid, swirling wall of white. The wind was no longer a whisper. It was a low, mournful howl. "It's a blizzard," he said, the words dropping like stones into the cabin's cold silence. "A whiteout. That trail I came in on, it's gone." He was trapped with her, and with his brother's secrets. He turned back to the room. "I have to get my gear from the trailer before it's buried. And we need firewood. Now?" He left the door open and went back to the porch, his body braced against the wind. Chief, understanding the shift in tone, followed at his heel. He unhitched the trailer, his hands already growing numb, and manhandled it closer to the cabin. He pulled out a heavy-duty tarp, his axe, and his rucksack. When he returned, Vanessa was standing exactly where he had left her, a pale ghost in the center of the room. Chief went directly to her and sat at her feet, looking up at her with a concerned tilt of his head. The dog's loyalty, so freely given to her, made Damien's next words feel rough in his throat. "You need to talk," he said, not unkindly, as he spread the tarp over the broken window frame. "You have to tell me everything. Why are you here? Who are you hiding from? And why does my dog know you?" Vanessa wrapped her arms around her stomach, her gaze fixed on Chief. He knows me because of James." Her voice was barely a whisper. "James brought him by my apartment a few times. He said Chief was the only one in the world he trusted completely." Damien stopped his work. He looked at the dog, who was now resting his chin on Vanessa's knee. "We were in love," she continued, her voice gaining a small measure of strength. "But we had to keep it a secret." "Why?" Damien asked, though a cold dread was already forming in his gut. "Because of him, Adrian Wells." Damien knew the name. Adrian Wells was the money. The investor who had partnered with Foster Brothers Construction 3 years ago, the one with the expensive suits and the blindingly white smile. James had brought him in, saying they needed his capital to expand. Damien had never liked him. What about Wells? James found things. In the books. She was shivering, whether from cold or fear, Damien couldn't tell. He was so smart, Damien, smarter than anyone knew. He found irregularities, big ones, money moving from jobs that didn't exist, payments to shell companies. She took a shaky breath. He said Wells was using Foster Brothers, using your name, to wash money, to launder it, millions. Damien stared at her, the pieces clicking into place. The sudden, bad investments, the angry clients, the financial black hole that had swallowed his company after James died. It wasn't incompetence. It was theft. It was a setup. He was so scared, she whispered, tears welling up again. Not for himself. He was scared for me. For this. She placed a hand on her stomach. He told me Wells was dangerous, not just a white-collar criminal, genuinely dangerous. So he hid you? Yes, he bought this cabin 2 months ago, under a false name, all cash. He drove me up here himself with supplies. He said it was the only place he knew of that was completely off the grid. She finally looked at him, her eyes pleading. He was going to expose Wells. He was going to fix everything. Damien's anger at his brother dissolved, replaced by a profound, aching sorrow. James hadn't been reckless. He had been trying to protect them all, and he had died for it. He gave me this, Vanessa said. She fumbled in the pocket of her jeans and pulled out a heavy, dark gray satellite phone. He said, "Don't use your cell phone, ever. They can track it. Only use this. There is one number in it, only one." Damien recognized the military-grade model. Who was the number? A man named Henry Lawson. James said he was an old friend from his college days, an FBI agent. The name hit Damien like a physical blow. Henry Lawson. He'd met him once, years ago, a sharp, no-nonsense guy. He'd had no idea James stayed in touch with him. "Did you call him?" Damien asked, his voice urgent. "The day I got here, about 2 weeks ago, I told him what James told me to say, about Wells, the money laundering, everything." "And?" Vanessa's face fell. "He believed me. He sounded worried. But he said it was complicated. He said, 'We are investigating, but these things take time, Vanessa. Wells is insulated. He has lawyers, judges.' He told me to stay hidden, to not move, not contact anyone else, and to wait. He said they were working on it, but it wasn't fast enough. The silence that fell was heavier than the snow outside. They were alone. The one person who knew they existed was tangled in bureaucracy, and the man who wanted them gone was powerful and free." They spent the next few hours in a grim, functional truce. Damien used the tarp and some loose floorboards from the porch to seal the broken window. He chopped the wood he'd found under the trailer, and soon a real fire was blazing in the hearth, pushing back the oppressive cold. As night fell, the storm reached a terrifying new intensity. The wind screamed, and the cabin shuddered under the assault. Inside, a fragile peace had settled. Damien sat on his pack, cleaning the shotgun Vanessa had given him. Vanessa was huddled by the fire, wrapped in a sleeping bag Damien had unpacked. Chief lay between them, a silent guardian, his head on his paws, though his eyes were open, tracking the shadows. Suddenly, the dog's head lifted. A low, sharp whine vibrated in his throat. Damien's hand stopped moving. "What is it, boy?" In one fluid motion, Chief was on his feet. He moved to the door, his body rigid, the fur on his back standing up. He wasn't growling, just staring at the door, vibrating with tension. Then Damien heard it. Underneath the roar of the wind, there was another sound. A low, deep thrum that didn't belong. It was the sound of a high-performance engine, powerful and disciplined, straining against the snow. A loud, frantic bark exploded from Chief. It was not a question. It was an alarm. Damien grabbed the shotgun and extinguished the lantern, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by the flickering fire. He moved to the small, intact window and scraped a patch of frost away. Through the swirling wall of snow, he saw them. 2 pairs of piercing, high-intensity LED headlights. They weren't from a truck. They were high off the ground, belonging to 2 massive, black luxury SUVs. They were cutting through the blizzard with terrifying ease. He saw Vanessa's reflection in the glass, her hand flying to her mouth, her face a mask of pure terror. "No," she whispered, stumbling to her feet. "No, it's not possible. How? How did he find me?" The SUVs stopped, their lights flooding the cabin, pinning them like insects. Damien turned to her, his face grim. "Who?" Vanessa was shaking her head, her eyes wide and unseeing. "Adrian Wells." The high-intensity beams of the SUVs cut through the swirling snow, turning the cabin into a stage and pinning them in a harsh, artificial daylight. Damien felt Vanessa flinch behind him, a small, choked sound escaping her. "Get away from the window," he ordered, his voice low and hard. "Go to the back wall, near the fireplace. Stay low." Outside, the powerful engines idled, a deep, confident rumble that was a counterpoint to the howling wind. Then the heavy, solid thud of a car door closing, followed by 2 more. Damien moved, pressing himself against the wall next to the door, shotgun held ready, but pointed at the floor. He didn't need to tell Chief what to do. The dog was already silent. The frantic alarm barks had ceased, replaced by a low, menacing growl that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards. Heavy footsteps crunched on the snow-covered porch. They were slow, unhurried. These were not men worried about the storm. A sharp, polite knock echoed through the cabin. 3 precise raps. It was the knock of a guest, not an intruder, and that made it all the more terrifying. Damien looked at Vanessa. She was pressed against the stone of the hearth, her face as white as the snow outside. He gave her a sharp nod, then took a steadying breath. He reached over and pulled the door open, using his own body as a barrier. The man standing in the center of the porch was the visual definition of out of place. This was Adrian Wells. He was in his early 50s, with perfectly styled, silver-gray hair and a face that looked like it belonged on the cover of a business magazine. He was impeccably dressed. Despite the blizzard, he wore a dark cashmere overcoat, unbuttoned, revealing a tailored suit. His leather shoes, polished to a mirror shine, were already dusted with snow, an offense he seemed to be ignoring through sheer force of will. He smiled, a wide, dazzlingly white expression of pure false courtesy. Flanking him were 2 large men. The one on his left, Jonah Reed, was thin and wiry, with a long face and pale, watchful eyes that scanned everything, the broken window, the roofline, Damien, before settling. The other, Damon Scott, was a wall of muscle, thick-necked and broad, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a heavy-duty parka. "Vanessa? My dear?" Adrian Wells said, his voice smooth and educated, projecting just enough to be heard over the wind. "Thank goodness. We were so terribly worried." He made to step forward, his eyes focused entirely on Vanessa, as if Damien were merely a piece of furniture. Damien didn't raise the shotgun. He simply shifted his weight, his shoulder blocking the entryway completely. Wells stopped. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes, a cold, clear blue, finally focused on Damien. The feigned concern was replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "And who is this?" "I'm Damien Foster," Damien said, his voice flat. "I own this cabin." Wells's perfectly groomed eyebrows rose. "You own it?" "I see." He recalibrated instantly, the charming mask slipping back into place. "Mr. Foster, a pleasure. I'm Adrian Wells. I'm a friend of Vanessa's and a business partner of her late boyfriend James." He nodded toward Vanessa, who was trying to make herself invisible against the back wall. "We've been searching for her for weeks. She's not well." At that moment, Damien felt something shift inside him. He looked at Wells's clean, expensive face. He looked at his two hired thugs. Then he looked at Vanessa, trembling, pregnant, and wearing his dead brother's shirt. The cold, sharp resentment he'd felt for James, for the secrets, the debt, the whole impossible mess, evaporated. It was gone. It didn't matter why James had hidden her or what he'd failed to tell his brother. All that mattered was that he had hidden her, and that this smiling, cashmere-clad man was the reason. The mission was suddenly, starkly clear. His protective instincts, honed by years in the service, surged forward, eclipsing everything else. He was no longer a failed businessman. He was a shield. His stance widened, his feet planting themselves on the old floor. "She seems fine to me." "Ah," Wells said, giving Damien a look of polite condescension. "But you don't know her. James's passing, it was a terrible shock, a tragedy." He spoke the word as if he'd rehearsed it. "We all understood she needed time, but running off like this, in her condition, it's not rational." He was speaking to Damien now, trying to recruit him, man to man, painting this as a mental health crisis. "She's grieving, Mr. Foster, deeply confused. She needs proper medical care, which is why I'm here, to take her home." "He's lying!" Vanessa's voice was a desperate shriek from the fireplace. "Damien, he's lying.